Hi, everybody. So, today I'm going to be talking about following your calling. This is something that I have been learning about recently and not so recently, like over the last year or so. I thought be something that maybe you guys would like to explore together. So, I want to start by talking about what I used to think calling was and now what I think calling is. So, let's try not to read ahead too much. Okay, so what I used to think when people talk about the word calling, I have a calling on my life. I feel called to do this. It's important to have kind of like a purpose that you live for. One of our mentors, Brian Johnson at Optimize.me, he talks about this a lot too. It's also used a lot in Christian circles. God has made everyone with a purpose and a plan, and I feel this calling on my life to help orphans or to travel the world or whatever it might be, or even to make a difference in the financial industry, whatever it might be. So when you feel a calling or have a passion for something, um, that can be life changing versus not having one. So it's kind of a really important topic that we're talking about today. What I used to think, so when I was young, I always had this like future focus mindset. I always was like, what am I going to do with my life? I need to know. I have one life to live. What am I going to do? So when I was 12, I heard about finding your people group. And I thought that the best thing that I was like, there's two kinds of people I could affect. People who are already like kind of have their life together, or people who like really don't have their life together. And I was like, I really want to help people who like don't have their life together at all. And I want to help girls like kind of slightly younger than me. And so I really wanted to help specifically like prostitutes, runaways, kids on the street, girls who were struggling with maybe crisis pregnancies, unplanned pregnancies, all that stuff, who maybe didn't know what direction, they didn't have their life all together, and they were wondering what to do, kind of like needed a big sister kind of a thing. Um, I've talked about that in my story and some other videos. So I kind of identified that as my people group. Not that you need to do that. I'm not even encouraging you to do that. Later, I've kind of come to realize that that was in some ways limiting to me, instead of realizing that the best thing I can be to the world is being the best Kay that I can be and ministering to people, touching people's lives as they come into my life. And having the idea of ministering to people specifically in my so-called people group was great for highlighting my radar and making me think, oh wow, that person is like would be the perfect person for me to make an impact on their life. But God opened my eyes to see that really I should have my eyes open to everybody who comes into my life, and have an impact on them in one way or the other, and not kind of put myself in a box. So that was just one thing that I learned on my way to discovering what my calling is. So I also, in that same way of thinking, kind of used to think my calling was static. Like there's a plan that God knows the future, so he knows where I'm going to end up, and I want to follow the best path to get there. So there's one perfect plan. I want to live the best life I can. I want to fulfill my destiny. You know, they talk, I think it's Star Wars where they talk a lot about, is it destiny or do you make your own destiny? Like all that stuff. And I know there's tons of movies where they talk about it. Are you destined to get to this point regardless of the decisions you make? Or do you make your own destiny? Can you change that plan? But changing that plan then assumes that there was a plan in the first place. So you're still saying that you believe that there's an ultimate destiny, and then you're not living it. So anyway, it's all very confusing when you think of it that way, I think. And then the third thing I thought was designed by someone else. God has his plan set up for me. It's up to me to follow that plan, but I'm maybe not as maybe I don't have as much ownership over the design of that plan. I'm just called to follow it. So what I believe about calling now is somewhat different. I definitely believe that God has a hand in our calling. I believe there's much more of a partnership aspect, though, between us and God. God lives in us and he is united with us. He talks metaphorically about us being his bride. So, like me and Jay, we are two individuals, obviously, but our life together is in partnership. So, I'm not going to go and do something like spend $1,000 on something without talking to him about it first. Like, we are in a partner team together. I definitely feel that our life and calling is God giving his say and us giving our say, and us coming together in partnership, in relationship, walking out that calling together, which we still have not defined, but we will get there. And I know it's, again, a little bit like cyclical to think about it this way, but God knew from the beginning what we would want to do because he made us that way in the first place. Like, he knew it's like I said, cyclical. Like, whether he has a plan at the end, like you're definitely going to do this, then he put everything in us and makes our life experiences to form us to follow that plan. Or if you look at it the other way, he made us a certain way initially, and there are many paths perhaps, but no matter what, we're going to end up following what he put in us. We are a seed. So maybe that tree grows up, and based on life experiences, it turns a little to the right, or turns a little to the left, or turns a little south, or whatever. But the seed is still the same. So we have all of the things in us that God knows will, if we are, we are fully growing and expressing ourselves, then we will get to where we want to be. So whether you think of the path of there's one destiny, you either make it or you don't, you either succeed or you fail, which I don't really ascribe to, or you think of life as being a lot more flowy, which I agree, but I think there's a little bit more of a direction. So kind of like a 50-50. I think there's a little truth in both ways of thinking. Either way, God has it under control. I definitely don't have to feel like I'm a failure if I don't meet this perfect plan that God dreamed up for me, but I couldn't live up to it. And I tried my hardest, but I couldn't live up to it, or I got distracted along the way, or any of that stuff. He knows what's going to come in our path. And so he has already planned for that. He wouldn't choose this unattainable perfect plan for us when he can see the future, and he knows the distractions that will come, which probably are just things that will redefine who we are and help to build our character and help us to grow and reveal the reality of that seed that he put in us from the beginning. So yeah, that's my point with that. I think I've talked about that enough there. Now let's talk a little bit more about calling. What is this thing, calling, that we've been talking about? That was my biggest issue. Like, I talked about calling so much and so assumptively, like, oh, of course you have a calling on your life. Like, let's talk about that. Like, let's talk about what that is. Well, let's define calling. Let's figure out what we're really talking about in the first place. I don't think it's I am called to be a nurse, and that is the be-all and end-all of who Kay is. Specifically because I'm not necessarily interested in medicine, but, hypothetically. But calling, I am called as a mother, as a wife, as a friend, as a daughter, as a sister. I have a lot of roles. I have a lot of ways that I can serve and provide service to the world. So I wouldn't call those specifically callings in the way that we're talking about calling today. But I do think it's important to point out that I think that defining calling as a single thing, a single role, or a single checkbox of I made my calling or I didn't, I failed in following my calling, I think that is not an appropriate response or way of looking at the calling on your life. I believe that calling is feeling a tug on your heart. If you feel a tug on your heart, you are being called. It's that simple. There is a feeling of call to something more, something deeper, something better, something different. And that call might be coming from you, from God, from seeing outside needs, from opportunities around you. You might feel that call in your heart. There's something there. But God speaks through all those things. So ultimately, it is God. And ultimately, it's also you, because it's partly your desires, your emotions, maybe even your hormones coming together and saying, pay attention. Something's going on here. And that's how God speaks to us. That's a lot of why I say it is a definite partnership between us and God. He knew that, say, outside stimulus would spark this call in our heart. Maybe seeing a homeless person living on the side of the street for the first time, and you're like, something has to be done. I need to do something about this. Maybe it's just giving them money one time. Maybe it's creating a whole organization to help the needy. Either way, it's still a call. It doesn't have to be this label that we put on ourselves. I am called to help the homeless. That can just be feeding them a meal, taking them to a diner or something and offering them like a meal or giving them a smile. It's being aware that there are ways that you can affect the world around you with every single person who crosses your path. So that takes me back to that people group idea. Just be careful not to label callings or people group or anything too narrowly, where you might miss opportunities to serve based on who you are in every situation that you're put in. Whether you're a stay-at-home mom and your child is napping, you might feel a call to do something. You might feel a call to journal. That's still serving, even if you're not necessarily affecting somebody's life. You are being the best person that you can be. Me being the best Kay that I can be is absolutely the biggest call on my life, because when I am fulfilling the fullness of that seed that is who I was planted and created as when I was first born, that little seed, I'm growing into the fullness of the woman that I already am, already truly am, already have my DNA inside of me, already have God's spirit fully inside of me. I am who I am. My spirit is who I am. It's not evolving into a different person or anything, but there is still growth and revelation happening. I'm still revealing the fullness of who I am. I will still grow into a better and wiser and more influential person. So I think it's important to realize the dynamic nature of a call. And I also think it's important to realize you're called to serving yourself. Put on your own oxygen mask first. It's not selfish. Selfishness is not necessarily wrong. Self-centeredness is wrong. Exclusion of others for the sake of self and putting yourself above others. But you need to put yourself first in the sense of caring for yourself so that you're not depleting yourself of oxygen and then not able to help anyone. Put on your own oxygen mask first. We've talked about that in other videos. So I also feel strongly, let me just narrow in a little bit. Actually, let me not do that. Okay. I feel strongly that we have ownership over the call. If we feel it, then we are truly desiring to follow it. Now, I know I already said that before, but that's important for this next area that we're going to be talking about. So sometimes we think that we're being called to something we don't actually want to do. I remember one of my friends in youth group saying, like, I'm afraid that God's going to call me to something that I don't want to do. And she was very interested in writing and I think it was one other thing. And the youth leader said, if you're interested in writing and that other thing that I can't remember, then that's what God is calling you to do. Your passions and desires are partly there because it's in connection. God's not going to give you gifts and then ask you to do something totally contrary to those gifts, because that's, first of all, wasting. So like, say, this is simplistic, but say that you are very skilled in medicine and you are not very skilled in like art, and God calls you to be an art teacher. Like, first of all, your skills for medicine would go to waste. And second of all, you're like, if you don't even desire to be an art teacher, then if he wanted you to be an art teacher, he would put that desire in you. So God is going to work in correlation with all the pieces that he's given you. I know that sometimes he calls us to something that seems too big for us so that he can help us through it, but we're not talking, that's apples and oranges, you know? We're not talking about him kind of sabotaging your life, or calling you to something that you'd be unhappy in. That's not the kind of God that he is. His plan for us is a plan for our good and our happiness and to bring us prosperity. Not preaching prosperity gospel just because I said the word prosperity, but he wants to see us thriving. Obviously, all parents want to see their children thriving and succeeding in their gifts and talents. And God is just the same way. He always refers to himself as our Father, so that we would understand, if we can give good gifts to our children, how much more does our Father desire to give good things to those who ask him? Sometimes we're just the ones who are denying accepting those gifts. That's what I'm going to talk about a little bit next. Sometimes we think we're being called to something that we don't actually want to do, but in those situations, we're either, number one, hearing or interpreting the call incorrectly. So then the answer is to think more deeply about it, journal more about it, talk with others about it to get more clarity. Or we might feel afraid that we're incapable, that we don't have what it takes, or that we may fail. So we might feel, like I said, maybe called to start an organization to help the needy, like around the world, and feel like, wow, that's such a huge undertaking. I don't think I can do that. And then kind of the cop out then is to feed the homeless and give them a meal and then walk away. But if your heart is saying, I want something more, pay attention to that. Why do you want something more? It's not that God's asking you to do something that you don't want to do. It's that you really want it. You're just afraid. Don't let your fear stop you from being the person that you really want to be. What's the phrase? Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing in spite of being afraid. That's what real courage is. So being afraid isn't wrong. If you feel fear about something, it doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do. You need to think more deeply about where the fear is coming from. If it's a fear of inadequacy or a fear of discomfort, or maybe temporary discomfort, just maybe you don't want to take a class or have to go through an internship process to get where you want to be, but maybe it's worth it to get where you want to be. Or maybe you're not called to that in the first place. Maybe it would terrify you to actually do that because you're not supposed to be doing that. That's something to really consider. So again, journaling, thinking deeply, talking with others can really help you explore your own thoughts and feelings. And that little calling, that little tug can then be more expressive. It can be now phrases and sentences, and you can understand more deeply what that little signal was trying to communicate. So to clarify, we should be very in tune with ourselves and with God to hear our calling clearly. We might feel a certain way and think we should react in a certain way based on that feeling, but maybe if we look deeper, we'll find a better, more encompassing, an all-encompassing solution that will be long-lasting and more beneficial. So I have an example in my life. There have been at least 2 times where I've gone to the supermarket and ShopRite, and I've gone and I drive home and I'm like almost crying. I feel so sad because I see certain people, like in our area, we have all types of people. We have very rich and very poor. We have all different races. We have all different, like, I don't know how to say this, but we have like some alcoholics or people who like smoke or maybe don't take well care of their body. Maybe don't have the best lifestyle choices, and you can kind of see that. Some people who maybe have some mental issues or emotional issues, and you can kind of see that. And when I go to ShopRite, like I'm very emotionally and spiritually sensitive, and so just being in this melting pot of so many different kinds of people, I can just feel and sense like all these needs around me, just so many needs. And I'm like, I have such a good life, and I have so many answers in my life, and I have so much like emotional, financial, family support, like so much security, knowledge of who God is and who I am. I just want to give that to all these people, but I feel like not everybody even wants it. Not everybody wants to be healed or wants to be helped. Some people do and some people don't. And it was just like, what do I do with this feeling, with this overwhelm of information? There were 2 things that I talked with Jay about it when I came home. And kind of two things that calling or that tug, I was like, I feel like it's talking to my calling. Like, I feel like this feeling is just saying, like, there's something bigger out there. There's something more. And number one is just confirming and affirming who I am. I am that kind of person who says, look, I have something to give. If you want it, please take it. Take what I have. The reason I have it is to give. And number two, it affirmed the way that I can give this. So it's through J&Kay or videos, so people can find this information online. They can search for it, so people who actually want to find it can find it. And then also through ministering at our local church that has an opportunity to serve the kinds of people that I want to reach out to and make a difference in their life. So think about what that tug might be in your heart, just not just in general in life, but throughout your life. If you feel those little tugs, think about what that might be telling you. And journal, talk it through with others. Like I talked it through with Jay. Just don't ignore it, don't bury it. And think about what you might be being called to right now. All right, thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.